Welcome to Medic Life, a video podcast for EMS professionals with your host, John Newton.
Hello everyone, and welcome to Medic Life. I'm your host, John Newton, and this is part 3 of a 4-part series on a discussion between myself and Mr. Bruce Hoffman about Narcan for providers and in the public. So we'll pick up where we left off in part 2. Hope you guys enjoy. This is not something that's really popular here in my area, but so there you're in Connecticut. Do the police officers have Narcan there?
The state police officers do, yes. So
walk me through I guess the process. So they show up first, they give the Narcan. What's kind of the process that goes through? What's, I guess, and I hate to use the term protocol because they're kind of outside the medical scope, but what's the kind of the protocol for that?
So in Connecticut, the state police are typically trained to the emergency medical responder level, or EMR level. So they come out of the academy with that kind of, I'd call it kind of pre-licensure, if you will. And they are dispersed certainly with Narcan, the atomizer devices. And I can tell you from the experience, it's on a spectrum, right? And some of it is due to the individual police officer and their comfortable, how comfortable they are with it. And there have been cases, and this is what I would say is more of what is happening, at least in the area that I live. The police kind of get there and they are dealing with some of the more peripheral safety issues at the time. And they kind of say, hey, I have my Narcan. You guys are allowed to give it. Here it is. And they kind of pass it off to our EMT to use if that's the case. So they have, I believe, a very specific set of protocol. I don't think that it's not very lengthy. It's not very in-depth. It's not very involved because they don't want it to be, because they know that they have EMS support, again, right behind them. So again,
I'm sorry, but they're not giving it prior to EMS arrival then?
In some cases, they are, based on the level of comfort of the police officer. Okay. So if the police officer feels that they're going to do more harm to the patient by giving them it incorrectly or whatever, they will wait until EMS gets there. So
I guess we've been going at this for a little while, and I was actually surprised that well, actually, I wasn't surprised that I had this much to say about anything. But I think I've really enjoyed this discussion, and I'm not going to cut it off, but just to sort of kind of recap some of the things that we've talked about. We've talked about the different provider levels, and even laypersons, the public being able to buy it. We've talked about the actual dosing for public level versus kind of what we feel and the opinion is what paramedics should be doing.
Right.
And we've even talked about some of these routes. Have we left anything out, do you think?
No, I think it's been a very robust conversation. It's one of these things that it got pushed out there, and I think so far it's working, but like everything in EMS, it needs a thorough go to really be able to collect good data on it, to be able to analyze it before we start to see aggressive changes. And that's probably the only thing that I would add is to say, if we are a service that does or is going to or is thinking about doing, pre-hospital Narcan, then certainly have the system in place, not only in the delivery of the medication or the assessment or the education, but then the analysis and the evaluation piece to say, yes, this is actually working, or no, it's not, and contribute to that nationally so we can actually build trends and things like that.
So I'm a paramedic, so this is not something that I probably would personally see. So let me ask you this, as a nurse on the other side, do you think that basic EMTs, when they roll up to a hospital with somebody that and they start giving their patient report, or they're calling on the radio and going, hey, bringing in such and such age patient, it was an overdose, we gave them Narcan, do you think it's going to cause kind of a little bit of stir within the nursing community about the things that they're doing? And or do you think it's going to give, I guess it's going to be kind of a little rougher interaction between EM, and I can't think of really an appropriate words to say without kind of being ugly about it. But I mean, sometimes it becomes a kind of a harsh situation when we talk about the interaction of it's almost like a turf thing, like, hey, you're invading our space because of things you can do, and you're laughing, but it is. So I mean, do you think that the paramedics, we already know that there is some grudge? We're paramedics, we should only be the ones giving the medications, and we know education-wise that when you think about being an advocate for your patient, and that's what we have to be. We have to be that advocate for our patient. I mean, we know that that's the best thing. But what about the interaction in between the other healthcare professionals outside of EMS? Do you think we're going to get some rebuff on this?
Chances are yes. But as always, and this is what I tell people usually that ask me questions like this. As both a nurse and a paramedic, I have the benefit of seeing kind of both sides of the street, right? I've been walking kind of both angles. What it really comes down to is diplomacy, communication, and education. That goes right back to what we were talking about earlier. We do not spend a lot of time focusing on kind of the cognitive piece of the paramedic's role, right? So, cognitively, in terms of all this knowledge acquisition, we do a great job. But in terms of kind of that emotional intelligence and the development of that, and knowing how to talk to people and diffuse situations, that is something that, again, is not regularly practiced, but it needs to, because that's how we're going to get through it. I don't think that any nurse or any EMT would give either party a hard time if it weren't for the fact that we already expect that there's going to be a problem, right? And so you're kind of walking in with your shield and your defenses already up, saying, oh my goodness, the nurse has no clue what this IO device is. What a moron. How come they don't know it? And the nurse is saying, oh, these EMTs, I'm going to, how can I make myself, feel okay with what's about to happen? So then they choose, maybe a less than diplomatic way to work around it. The point is that, we talk about, and I'll digress for just a minute. We talk about simulation in terms of, how often can we, intubate the mannequin, or can we decompress the chest of a mannequin, or pericardiocentesis also. But what about the simulation of interacting with other healthcare providers? It's always been it's always been a mystery to me of we train on everything except that which we naturally say is supposed to happen, and that's collaboration and teamwork. And I'm like, we should routinely be taking paramedic programs and nursing programs and making them work with each other during their undergraduate time, and really exposing each other to oh, I get what they do now. So the nurse that says you only put in a 20 gauge IV, and you're like, yeah, because we were upside down in a cliff underneath a river and it was -20 out. That's why there's only one IV. Practicing that stuff, because the more that we actually do it, the better we will all become at it.
No, I totally agree. I think that goes back to some of that psychological component in saying, that we don't get as some of the training. The training is just not there.
Yeah, absolutely. Yep.
One of the things that I remember from basic EMT school, intermediate school, paramedic school, and even having students in school was talking to the students about that component, about how we're supposed to interact with our other counterparts.
Right.
Sometimes it transitions over and sometimes it doesn't. And I think, we always find, as an instructor, we try to find that paramedic, that nurse, or whoever is going to take care of our students as that person who likes students, who likes interacting with the other counterparts. So, I don't know what kind of experience that is.
But like, John, just for a minute, like, wouldn't you think, right, that we would hire, like, it should almost be a prerequisite. Like, if you cannot work with people, then make that career choice and go into data or research, or where you're working alone in a lab and you don't have to collaborate with anybody. But like, you can't expect an emergency room nurse or an intensive care nurse. They cannot expect to not deal with patients' families, to not deal with unruly patients, not deal with unruly staff or type A personalities, etc. Like, that is part of being a nurse or being an EMT or being a paramedic or being a flight provider, whatever, right? That is part of what we do. And you're not going to see a paramedic or a nurse say, well, I'm not going to start the IV because I don't want to. Like, it should almost be like a job requirement. And that's still in development, and you're seeing more and more of a push come of that as we kind of blend into 22nd century healthcare.
It's funny, and sometimes I tell stories on myself when I talk to students, or and we all have done stupid things. But I think back over my career, and I'm not always the easiest person to get along with. I'm not always the fun, energetic guy here on Medic Life. But I will say that 90% of my complaints have been from bystanders that I've rubbed the wrong way.
Right.
Maybe a portion of those are family, and a portion of those are just random people just walking down the street. And I'm like, look, dude, go get away. Go find something else to do. And I still think that, there is that 5 of that 10%. There's 5% that there's probably a few nurses out there that if they see this or they see my name pop up on something, they're going to go, yeah, that. And there's going to be a whole line of explicitives after that. But I mean, and we all have those, you get on the truck and you go, all right, who's working shift tonight? Who's the people at the hospital? That's kind of some of the jokes in EMS. Okay, we're going to take the stinky bad patients of these people because we don't like them. And we really shouldn't do that. But I think, that there is a component, and I know we've gotten a little away from Narcan, but I think all the psychological stuff that goes with our interaction in between our peer group, with the other healthcare professionals, how, like you said, dealing with the public, they ask us a question and then we go, okay, well, here's kind of sort of an answer. And you look at your watch, click the radio. All right, well, I got somewhere I got to be, because you don't want to talk to them. Or maybe you feel put on the spot, or maybe you don't, while you feel comfortable interacting with patients, sometimes we don't feel comfortable being that public speaker, that person that somebody's going to say, hey, when EMS showed up, this is the guy that I talked to, or hey, I was out at Walmart and that John Newton guy, he's one of the paramedics or EMTs or ambulance drivers or whatever they want to call us. This is what he told me. And a lot of people don't want to be that person. And I think we should try to get away from that. We should try to maybe build more confidence in ourselves, maybe public speaking, things like that. And I think you made a good point about interaction. Maybe there's something that we could look at in the future for education, and maybe that's a topic for a different episode.
Right.
How maybe nurses and paramedics be required to actually have some classes together.
Absolutely.
A lot of the stuff we do is the same stuff.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, starting an IV, talking to patients and interacting with the patients are the same thing. You have to ask them the same questions.
Absolutely. Well, and that comes from, and that's been probably one of the longest turf battles that's ever been known probably to mankind, is kind of what happens extra-hospitally, what happens intra-hospitally, and there's certainly no way that we can blend it. What I will say is that where you typically find the best mixture happens to be like in your flight services, right? A lot of times people will say, oh my goodness, the helicopter's coming. I remember landing, you know, and walking into some hospitals, and people would just be like, oh my goodness, the team is here, you know, and you're treated like royalty. But yet they're yelling at the paramedic in the next room who has the 2-year-old kid, and you know, they only got a 24 gauge, right? You know, on this status asthmatic is you know, a 2-year-old, and yet we're picking up a patient who's having a STEMI and is.
I think that's though because, and I'm sorry, but do you think that's because you're critical care? You're seen as like a higher level of care, even though you have some more tools. Most of them do have different certifications, but they're still kind of the same.
It is, but some of that is our fault as EMS, right?
Thanks for watching part 3. Watch part 4 to see the conclusion of our discussion on Narcan in the public and with providers, as I speak with Mr. Bruce Hoffman. If you have missed any episodes, you can go back and watch part 1 and part 2 and catch up on what you've missed. And you can find those by subscribing down here in that corner. Until next time, guys, thanks for watching Medic Life.